I'm Luke Story. For the past 22 years, I've been relentlessly committed to my deepest passion, designing the ultimate lifestyle based on the most powerful principles of spirituality, health, psychology, and personal development. The Lifestylist Podcast is a show dedicated to sharing my discoveries and the experts behind them with you. I love me some green juice, and that's why I'm so grateful to be promoting our sponsor, Organifi, and I talk about that a lot because I use that stuff every day. Now, another product I use from Organifi almost every day, but rather at night than in the morning, is the Organifi Gold. This is the Soothe and Recover blend. This stuff tastes delicious, you guys. It's like a golden latte. Now, the core of the Organifi Gold is turmeric. It's an anti-inflammatory spice, and it's one of my favorite herbs in the world. Now, they combine the turmeric with coconut milk, cinnamon, ginger, lemon balm, and even a couple medicinal mushrooms like lion's mane to reduce stress and help you relax and sleep. It's amazing. So I use this as a base for a lot of my very relaxing tonics. So I'll have friends that come over and they're stressed out from the cell towers in LA and the traffic and the 5G and, life. And they're like, dude, hook me up. So I'll set them up with some biohacking technology, some things that relax them. And the elixir I always make is based with the Organifi Gold. Now, I put all kinds of other crazy weird stuff in there too, but this is what makes it taste good and be effective. So you can go hardcore like I do, or you can make a very simple cold or hot drink with Organifi Gold, and you'll be living the dream, whether it's in the morning, middle of the day, or especially at night, which again is when I like to take it. So go to Organifi.com, that's spelled with an I, Organifi.com/Luke, and save 15% off your order of the Organifi Gold or any of their other products using the code Lifestylist. Organifi.com/Luke. The code is Lifestylist. You know, when people use the term, I got a gut feeling, or you've got to listen to your gut, go with your gut, there's really something behind that. Your gut is now known as your second brain. And what makes your second brain intelligent is the symbiotic relationship between the various bacteria in there. What happens to many of us, yours truly included, is that we get an imbalance, a dysbiosis in there where you have too much of the bad guys, not enough of the good guys, etc. So we're constantly working on creating a balance in our gut so that we can have a strong immune system, so that our digestion's on point, and so that we can remain connected to our gut and be in a good mood. Your neurotransmitters are created in your gut, or a lot of them at least. And so if your gut's jacked up, you're going to have a bad life, my friend. Enter our sponsor, Just Thrive Probiotics. You can find them at thriveprobiotic.com/Luke. If you use the code Luke15, you're going to save 15% off. So if you want to say peace out to bloating, gas, leaky gut, digestive problems, you got to get on a good probiotic that will actually survive the digestive process. The spore-based probiotic by our friends at Just Thrive actually works because it does that. It lives inside you and hatches and makes a friendly gut environment. So go to thriveprobiotic.com/Luke and use the code Luke15 to save 15%. This is episode 244 of the Lifestylist Podcast. My name is Luke Story, and today's show will be a Q&A solo episode where I answer very specific questions from members of the Lifestylist Podcast Facebook group. Of course, it's needless to say that if you have questions for me, based on the information I've learned in my 23 plus years of research and development into all things self-help, spirituality, mindfulness, meditation, biohacking, anti-aging, etc., you can join the Lifestylist Podcast Facebook group for free. Ask your question there, and it's highly likely that at some point, unless your question is really mundane or something that's already been covered before, that I will answer it on a show just like this. That's the Lifestylist Podcast Facebook group. And I'm actually live streaming right now into that Facebook group. Kind of a double whammy here so that members of that group can watch me answer their questions sitting in my podcast studio by myself. Because why not? So before I get into this, I always like to preface these episodes, which don't include a guest that I can blame for their advice, but I have to take responsibility for any advice or anything that might be misconstrued as advice on this particular episode. I'd like to remind you that I am not a doctor or a health professional. I didn't even graduate high school, so I would listen, not that that means anything, because I don't know that there's much good to learn in high school anyway, but I just use it as a disqualifier, is to not encourage you to recommend risky health practices or crazy Kundalini yoga meditations without consulting a professional. I am a professional podcaster, but I'm definitely not a doctor and have not been trained as such. And many of the questions in the Lifestylist Podcast Facebook group are around health in general, although I have been encouraging members, and I will continue to do so, that I think the philosophical issues that we face, be them of the spiritual and emotional health genre, are probably more important than what's the best B vitamin, or should I be paleo or vegan or carnivore or whatever, right? What's the best biohack for this or that? Fun stuff, novel stuff, but I think at the end of the day, it's more about mindset and, how you're living your life based on intention and your raising of your own consciousness. That said, some of these questions are health related and they're fun to answer. And I'm just going to do my best to give my anecdotal reports on what I've personally witnessed or experienced. So that's my legal disclaimer. Send that to your lawyer. All right. Jonathan wants to know more about hyperbaric oxygen chambers. And it's funny that I made this manuscript for this episode before I dropped like a mega episode with Dr. Scott Scher a couple weeks ago, which, by the way, was number 240. That's episode 240. And the entire interview, which was perhaps an hour and a half, was all about hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which is something that I'm a huge fan of. But for those of you that missed that or wanted to get my take on it, I'll give a brief answer to that question. Now, I've been doing hyperbaric oxygen therapy for, going back probably 15 years for different things at different times. I think one of the primary uses of this therapy personally has been for air travel, for overcoming jet lag and just travel fatigue in general, even doing road trips, anything that I find to be extremely taxing. I like to go in and do maybe a 90-minute hyperbaric oxygen chamber session. And what this includes, for those of you that aren't familiar with this, is putting yourself in a pressurized chamber that's filled with a high concentration of pure oxygen. I mean, I guess it's 99.9, something like that. And it's not the, how do I say this? It's the pressure that makes it work. In other words, like if you just got on an oxygen generator and put a cannula in your nose and breathed oxygen, like some people with emphysema or different disorders will do, this is something entirely different. This saturates your entire body with oxygen. And there's different types of chambers. I would say that the hard chambers are the ones that are most effective for chronic illness and really moving the needle on your health. And those would be more of the medical grade. And then they do make these vinyl kind of blow up tube style tanks as well, which from what I understand are less effective for chronic illness. However, I have found those to be useful and definitely way less expensive to do sessions in for just, general well-being, recovering from physical exertion, exercise, travel, things like that. But from what I understand, especially after talking to Dr. Scott Scher in episode 240, who's one of the most world-renowned experts on the subject, that if you have something serious going on physically, the hard chambers, the more medical-grade chambers are more effective. Some of the things that this type of therapy is useful for are cancer. If you look into the alternative cancer treatment centers around the world, there are, many of them in Mexico and Panama and places where regulations are not as strict as they are in the West or in the United States, at least. Many people will, do kind of cancer tourism, I guess you could call it, and leave the U.S. so that they can go do things that are more experimental. And hyperbaric oxygen therapy is one of them. So it's been a huge, therapeutic use for cancer and also disorders like erectile dysfunction because it increases blood flow. It's also been used effectively for autism, PTSD. It's great for concussions and brain injuries. That might be, one of the most common uses of this therapy, as well as autoimmune and Lyme disease, etc. So I think any way you can get more oxygen into your body and brain is great. This would be the most aggressive and also, in most cases, very safe ways to do that. Now, you can do breath work, and then you can hang upside down. You can do all sorts of things to get more blood flow and oxygen into your brain and into your body. Fitness, of course, cardio, great ways to get oxygen. And there are, of course, different supplements that help with oxygen uptake and all of that. One of my favorites would be paracetam, which I just had a heaping tablespoon of prior to recording this. And there's a few things like that you can do, but the hyperbaric chambers are, a huge needle mover. And in most major cities, you can find a practitioner. It's usually like an alternative health center, an anti-aging center, that kind of thing. Or in LA, we have a couple dedicated oxygen centers that are more like medical clinics. And you can find these, and they can be a bit expensive. Between $150, $400 per session, something like that. So it's not cheap. But if you're someone who's chronically ill, I think this could be a great thing to look into. And so I want to thank Jonathan for that question in the group, and also to definitely encourage you to research Dr. Scott Scher. Of course, an episode, as I said, 240 of this here podcast. But you can also find him online. He's got a great website. I don't have the URL right in front of me, but if you Google Dr. Scott Scher, that's Sherr. He happens to be my personal doctor now because I was so impressed with his interview. He's just very knowledgeable. He works with Dr. Ted Achacoso. They use the same system of medicine. Ted was a very popular recent guest as well. So Scott is a great resource when it comes to all things oxygen. Okay, on to Tiffany's question. She would love to hear about my rewilding experiences and finding the balance between a wild natural lifestyle and the more modern biohacking approaches. Now, I love this question because to me, the number one biohack or the number one way to support your health is by acclimating yourself back into nature as much as possible. And so I'll cover a few ways that you can do that, some of which will be obvious, like, hey, walk outside. And then also some of those include harnessing different technologies. I'm sure if you listen to the show on a regular basis, you've heard me talk about my super fanness of red light therapy. I've got my Juve sitting here actually in the studio. I've got a couple of them on the property here. And that's a way of getting a natural spectrum of sunlight onto your body every single day, whether it's sunny out or not. So sometimes getting closer to nature means harnessing technology that either mimics or concentrates elements in nature. So we'll get to that. But let me just start out with why I think it's so important to get outdoors. And I'd love for you to do some research on my friend Daniel Vitalis, who's one of the pioneers in a practice known as Rewilding. And he's done so much content and so much work around the ideas that I'm about to cover, the main sort of overview being that humans are sick because we've moved indoors and domesticated ourselves. And in fact, this Tuesday, I just thought of this, he's the guest on our regular episode, and he's talking about becoming a modern hunter-gatherer, which he's done over the past few years. I mean, I guess he still has to go to Whole Foods here and there, but pretty much homie's living off the land. And so when I talk about rewilding, I always have to tip my hat to Daniel because he's really the one that was on my first guest episode number 2, going back over 3 years ago of this podcast, where he talked about, what has happened to humankind, negatively speaking, as a result of us moving indoors. And if you listen back to my interviews with people like Jack Cruz and many others, they will also indicate that all pathology, whether it be mental disorders, emotional problems, or physical illness, can really be traced back to the fact that we are not interacting with our natural environment in the ways that we've evolved to do. So getting outdoors is what's up, in short. Here's some of my favorite practices. So the first thing is getting as much sun on as much of your body as you can safely. So for me, I live in LA. There's lots of sun. Right now it's November 23rd, 2019 at the time of this recording. And I live in a canyon. And so I don't get a lot of sun here, which is unfortunate. I also don't get a lot of cell towers blasting my brain while I sleep, which is awesome. But it's not that sunny in the winter months in the canyon that I live. So what I do in order to get my sun is I climb up the hill and take my dog for a walk. And especially when it's kind of chilly, it's really nice. And I just take my shirt off and I'm just that guy who's walking around the neighborhood with his shirt off. And, some people might think that's kind of weird. I think it's weird to wear a shirt personally because the sun is so good for you and your skin. Now, that said, I also have been exposed to the sun a lot for a long time because I'm kind of a sun worshiper, and I also have fairly olive skin. So I'm not very susceptible to getting sunburned. So when I say getting as much sun as you can all the time, that definitely does not include getting so much sun that your skin turns pink and begins to burn and become sensitive and painful. That is not good for you. So in order to work up to sun exposure, you really want to take it one step at a time. And depending on how close to the equator you are, what time of year it is, that's really going to depend. And also what time of day it is. If it's solar noon and you're living close to the equator, 5 minutes of sun, you're good. If you're living, further north and it's the middle of winter, you're not going to get very much sun because the sun is very far away, right? So you have to just kind of be sensible about how you interact with the sun. But there are a couple really good hacks. Using red light therapy has actually been proven to make you more resilient when it comes to sun exposure. Also, chaga mushrooms, especially in the form of just drinking a lot of chaga tea. Chaga has melanin in it and vitamin D2, which actually acts as sort of an internal sunscreen and helps you to be able to tolerate more sun, as does the popular supplement astaxanthin, that is a red marine algae that they make into an extract. And taking some astaxanthin also makes not only your skin, but your eyes more resilient to sun exposure. And the best time for me, well, it depends on what you're going for. If you're going for vitamin D and regulating hormones, then midday or solar noon sun is the most powerful, and especially getting that on your naked body. There's been studies to support the fact that getting sun on your naked breasts helps decrease the chances of breast cancer. And also for the gentlemen listening, getting sun on your nads safely, of course, improves your testosterone production. And so there's that type of sun exposure that we're doing for the hormones. We're doing, just to get that great sun energy into our skin. But then you have the sun gazing, which is exposing your eyes and hopefully some of your skin to the red light spectrum that exists at dawn and at dusk. And sun gazing is something, again, I have to give a disclaimer. This does not mean going out at 1 p.m. and staring up at the sun like a spaz. You got to really think this through. Sun gazing itself as a practice goes back thousands of years. It's part of the Ayurvedic medical system, in fact, but it is something you want to do safely. So I'm not going to teach you how to sun gaze on the show because I'm not an expert at it, although I've been doing it for many years. The basic idea is when the sun rises and the sun sets, for that first or last 10 to 20 minutes, there's very little, if no UV present, which is what could damage your eyes or give you a sunburn or something like that. You're getting the near infrared spectrum of red light from the sun, which is essentially what devices like Juve concentrate and deliver to your body on demand. Even that being said, it's something that you work up to. And, what I typically do myself, depending on how long the sun's been up or how long until it goes down, is kind of stare at a point that is maybe 20 to 40 degrees below the actual sun. And again, this is something you can easily research and find safe ways to do. You can also listen to my past episodes with Jack Cruz. I think every time I've talked to him, he's talked about the benefits of sun gazing, and it's something he's a big fan of. And he's a neurosurgeon and knows quite a lot about the brain and about the eyes. And one of the benefits you can expect in terms of rewilding, and I think what has been one of the detriments to our domesticated lifestyle, is that your circadian rhythm, which includes many of your hormones and neurotransmitters, are regulated by your exposure to different color spectrum of light, especially dopamine. So if you're someone that suffers from depression and low dopamine, it could be, in my opinion, probably and quite quickly solved by watching the sunrise and the sunset. So I'll say that about your dopamine. Also, using technology and pornography and anything like that artificially spikes your dopamine is also going to limit your ability to achieve the benefits, but that can be fixed and in some cases totally reversed by working on your circadian rhythm and your relationship to the light as it affects your hormones and neurotransmitters so positively. Next one is forest bathing, which, is just kind of a weird word for like taking a hike or walking through the trees. There's something that happens to your nervous system. You have a parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system response to your environment. Sympathetic, meaning you're more in a defensive fight or flight, preparing for danger kind of state of being. Parasympathetic, being very relaxed and calm. And I notice myself, even if I just go up the hill through Laurel Canyon and go to a park that I like to go to where there's very few people and no cars and, it's quite quiet and there's a lot of tall trees. If I just walk around in there for an hour, I walk out a completely different person. So there's a lot to this, especially if you can do it with some grounded sandals, such as the earth runners that electrically ground you. If you can do it barefoot, depending on the surface of ground you're walking on, that can be difficult in some forests, obviously. But being grounded, getting natural light in your eyes, which, by the way, if you're wearing sunglasses, contacts, or spectacles, you're not getting natural light. You're getting artificial filtered blue light. And that's tough if you can't see. I understand if you have really poor vision, that's difficult to do. But at least periodically taking off your glasses is very useful. And I've found as I've acclimated myself to natural light that I don't typically feel the need to wear sunglasses. I prefer a hat if the sun's like in my eyes directly, but you do acclimate. But in forest bathing or just spending time in nature, you have the grounding effect, you have the interaction with light, you have the kind of energetic resonance with all of the fauna and flora. And then you also have the olfactory effect of all of the essential oils that are being emitted from all these beautiful plants and trees. And even just sitting in my office sometimes, as I stare at my bookshelf right now, I have a essential oils diffuser, and I love putting like the evergreen type oils in there and just kind of getting the sense that I'm in a forest, even though I'm sitting in the podcast studio. Obviously, if you get outdoors, you get that for reals, the real deal. So getting out into nature, whether it be, desert, beach, forest, is all good. But I think there's something very special about getting out into the mountains, into a heavily wooded area. There's just something very special about it. And also, while you're at it, really taking time to observe what's growing there and interacting with it. I like to just go and kind of touch plants and just feel the soil. I'll just grab some soil in my hand and smell it and kind of interact with the microbiome of the forest. And I find all of those things just to be extremely grounding, especially being someone who's lived in the city for so long, but spent much of my early years in the country. So, I've kind of I have a part of me that's tethered back there, but for professional and just convenience reasons, I still find myself living in the city. which is probably going to end soon, hopefully, at least to some degree. Another part of getting outdoors that I think is just, is just so therapeutic in so many ways, and that is getting into natural bodies of water. My all-time favorite thing to do in the world, well, I mean, in nature maybe, you know the thing that comes to mind that's everyone's real favorite thing, which you could conceivably do with your second favorite thing, which is getting in hot springs, meaning you could be in hot springs with someone you love, at least some friends that you like. But I find that the healing mineral waters of hot springs around the world to just be so grounding, so therapeutic, so beneficial. And also just getting yourself in the mud. You know, some of the hot springs that are outdoors in nature will tend to be quite muddy. And some people are grossed out by this. The mud will often smell like farts because there's sulfur in it. It's just like, who wants to go roll in the mud like a pig? Well, I do. And there's a lot to that. You can actually detox yourself by covering yourself in mud and going out in the sun and letting that dry. It's also a great natural sunscreen if you happen to be doing hot springs somewhere where it's quite sunny, you know, like in the summertime, especially at high altitude where you might be more prone to burn. So you can just rub that on your shoulders and on your face and places where you might get a sunburn. And there's also something too, and I don't know this is scientifically validated, but I have a feeling it probably could be if you look. It's just not something I've looked into, but I've had the sense because there's so much bacteria in soil and in mud, and so much of the bacteria or the microbiome of our skin suit gets destroyed through showering in chlorinated water and using caustic chemicals and soaps and shampoos and things that I'm sure our microbiome is probably not in great shape when it comes to our skin. And that's especially true for people who choose to use those, hand sanitizer sprays and things like that. By the way, from what I understand, those are extremely toxic, even to breathe the vapors of them. I know when I get around people using those, like hand sanitizers, my body does not like it. It's like, oh, get that shit away from me. And I've heard, and this just could be a health meme, I don't know this to be true, but I've heard that there are bacteria on your hands and on your body that once you kill it with those really strong hand sanitizers, that it never comes back. So maybe you could get those things to come back if you go roll around in the mud and play in the dirt. I know that a really important part of rearing children is allowing them to interact with their environment. It helps to establish their microbiome if they get to go play in the dirt. So somewhere maybe in the turn of the century, we became very germ phobic and everything became quite sterile, which is understandable when it comes to diseases that can spread through lack of sanitation, such as, water that's not clean, etc. However, I've never heard of anyone dying from going out in the forest and touching some dirt or some mud, playing around with it, getting it under your fingernails. It's a way of interacting with your environment and sort of yoking yourself to the biome of the forest or of the hot springs, the rivers, the lakes. It's connecting your biology to the biology of your environment, which I think has got to be a really good thing. If nothing else, it just feels really good to me. And then, of course, in addition to the hot springs, man, the holy grail of hot springs to me is if you can find some hot springs that have a freezing cold body of water next to them. There are places on Earth where hot springs will kind of emerge and people will build one with rocks right next to a cold river or something like that. That's the ultimate. There's a place in Colorado that I love called Pagosa Springs, and there's a little kind of hot springs resort there. The whole town is basically built around, these hot springs. And there's a freezing river that runs right by it. And so you can just hop out of one of the tubs and wade out into the river and swim. In the summer, it's not that cold, but I'm sure in the fall, winter, and even early spring, that river has got to be freezing. And to me, there's literally nothing better than getting super hot in some hot water and then getting in some freezing ass water like an ice bath. I kind of mimic this at home because I have a jacuzzi tub in the master bedroom, and I'll do, like mineral baths, Epsom salt baths, put essential oils in there, magnesium chloride baths, things like that. And then I'll go get in my cold plunge in the backyard and kind of go back and forth and sometimes almost pass out because I make the tub super hot and the other tub super cold. But doing this in nature is just the ultimate, man. I mean, it's just like to me, there's nothing better than that. And so typically what I'll do when I travel is ahead of time. In fact, I'm just about to go to Costa Rica in a couple weeks. And like after booking my Airbnb and all, the rental car and all that, the next thing is like Hot Springs, Costa Rica. And I'm going to geek out and research that and try and get myself in some of them. So that's a great way that you can find them. You can also find hot springs now on findaspring.com. My friends over at Live Spring Water recently took over Find a Spring from Daniel Vitalis, or at least part of it. And so they're upgrading that site, which I'm going to talk about in a moment in regards to harvesting spring water that you drink. But they've now included a directory of hot springs, or at least are in the process of doing that on findaspring.com, which I think is great. It's sort of a double-edged sword. It's like, I was actually talking to Mukunde, the owner of Find a Spring and Live Spring Water, and I was like, man, put every hot springs in the world on that site so we can all find them. And it's like, yeah, that's good. But then again, there's like the selfish part of us hot springs aficionados, where you don't want tons of people to find them. And I don't know what is morally or ethically right there. Hopefully if you're promoting a local hot spring, especially the ones in nature I'm more speaking about that are kind of hidden away and harder to find, you're hoping that how do I say this? Conscious people are coming and they're not like rolling up, cranking loud aggro music and smoking weed, and like nothing against smoking weed, but just like if people are going there to party, that's what I'm trying to say, like leaving garbage and not respecting these sacred waters and the lands. And in some cases there's been, I've seen graffiti and just beer cans left over. And it's like, oh, dude, come on. Why do these people have to find out about the spring? And so, findaspring.com, by creating a directory for hot springs, could make things worse. I don't know. Hopefully not. Hopefully people like me, and of course you listening to this show, are going to be respectful of these sacred lands and of these waters that creation has provided for us. So I don't know. I err on the side of like promoting this. I think if we have healthier, happier people, we have a better world. And part of what makes us healthy and happy is interacting with nature and rewilding ourselves. And I think human beings throughout our various incarnations over the eons have been recognizing and participating in getting in bodies of water that have unique qualities. And most hot springs, they each have their own kind of profile of minerals, the way they smell, the way they feel in your skin, the type of rock formations that you find them in, the topography, whether they're in the mountains, in the desert, et cetera. They all kind of have their own unique personality. And I think that humans are just drawn to that water because we know it's good for us. And especially something I like to do when I travel, not only in the case of like finding the hot springs in a place that I'm going, but if I'm doing a road trip, I'll also find all of the hot springs, rivers, creeks, lakes, streams on the way. And I'll stop in as many bodies of water as I can and jump in. And I prefer some of them to be freezing. I love when I find like a 35-degree river on the side of the road. I can just jump in. There's nothing more refreshing and reducing the inflammation from driving and the aches and pains of sitting behind the wheel for hours on end. So I'm just a huge fan of interacting with water in general. Speaking of interacting with water, I did a show, must have been 2017-ish, maybe it was a couple years ago. I did the Water Wars trilogy, where I did, it must have been like 6 hours worth of content all about the best drinking water practices. And so I encourage you to go back. You can even search in the Apple Podcast app, Luke Story Water Wars, and you'll find that trilogy. If you want to find all of my recommendations on water, you can go to lukestory.com/water guide. That's lukestory.com/water guide. And there I cover all of the different filters that I like. If you're going to go the filter route, my favorite companies that produce spring water and why, advice on going to collect your spring water. It's pretty comprehensive. I did that guide a couple years ago, but it still holds up. I think I might kind of update it with a few recent discoveries since I made that. A couple other companies have come out that make great filters and whatnot. And your water strategy to me is just crucial. However, I'll just summarize by saying what I believe to be the best water in the world to drink is safe, clean, natural, untreated spring water. That does not mean you drink water from a creek, from a brook, from a stream, from a river, from a lake. That is not spring water. It might be a spring-fed lake, meaning all that water comes from underground, from an aquifer. But spring water in its true sense means that it's water that's popping out of the side of a mountain and is just gushing out or trickling out in some cases at one location. And that water is coming from deep within the earth, sometimes as far as 10,000 feet below. And it's my belief that if you're getting spring water at a very high altitude, in many cases on the planet, that water has never been through the hydrological cycle, meaning it's never been exposed to the environment post-industrial revolution. So that water is pure and clean and does not have acid rain, pesticides, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, all of the things that are inherently and unfortunately in our much polluted water supply around the planet. So there's also something called primary water, which is a fascinating area of research. I recommend you explore. Primary water is water that has never been exposed to the surface of the earth and comes up at certain springs. And that's as good as it gets. And what the concept is behind primary water, and I haven't researched this that much. It's just kind of something I've heard of and, looked at a few websites and kind of dug around. It seems to be valid as far as I can tell. But the thing with primary water is that it would indicate that the earth itself actually makes water. And that is a fascinating concept to me. Because that would fly in the face of the kind of environmental extremists that say that we're running out of water, which, like running out of crude oil. Many people can scientifically validate that, in fact, there's plenty of that underground. Not to say that we shouldn't look for alternative sources of energy. That might be less disruptive to the environment, et cetera. I'm all for that. But I have a sense that there's probably enough water inside the planet to keep us going indefinitely based on my research. So if you want to explore collecting or harvesting your own spring water, this is one of the best ways to rewild. I would add that if you get my guide at lukestory.com/water guide, in there you'll find a great lab where you can send in a sample of the spring water you find. And if you get your water lab tested, or if you live in California, you can order water like I do from livespringwater.com, and their water is routinely lab tested to be free of harmful microbes and heavy metals and toxins and all of that kind of stuff. It's the cleanest water you could ever hope for. No acid rain, no weird stuff in it. But if you find a spring, one indication, to me at least, that a spring is likely safe is if local people have been drinking from that spring for a long time, and the local people routinely go and collect water. For example, there's one on the side of, I forget what highway it is, in Sedona. And you can pull up there any time of the day and people are collecting water. Now, there was a period at that Sedona spring where there was a fire, and they had to spray that fire retardant on the hills around the spring. That got into the aquifer. And then they had to dig up the spring and clean it all out. And then, after it all kind of washed through, it became safe again. But there are situations like that, which is why I always recommend just opting for the highest altitude springs you can find. Some of the best ones I've ever found are in Colorado. And many of them you can find on Find a Spring. And to me, if the water's up that high, the chances of it being polluted from above are in some cases nil because there's nothing above it, right? Now that's, one could argue that water is kind of being elevated from an aquifer underneath that mountain, and those groundwaters could in fact be tainted, and that could be valid in some cases. It oftentimes depends on the amount of agricultural activity in said area or industrialization in general. So obviously, if you're getting water on top of a mountain and there's 5 coal mines or factories next to that mountain, it might be problematic. But I like to get water from the earth. That's how we've evolved. That's how we got here, folks. If you are into the paleo movement, well, paleo water would be spring water that's not been touched by human hands, except to put it in a bottle. So that is kind of my favorite way to get nature inside of the body. And then next would be interacting with animals. And this would include domestic animals when it comes to rewilding. I mean, my dog is about as far from a gray wolf as you could get. She's been, had all of the meanness and toughness bred out of her. She'll still try to chase a squirrel, and that's when you see that wolf come out. It's interesting when that happens. But there is a visceral, just known kind of ancient relationship with certain animals that we have. And so I think observing animals in nature, even the ones that you can't get close to, is just very grounding. And then even our domesticated animals, our farm animals, or animals that we keep as pets and members of our family, touching those animals, interacting with them, looking them in the eyes, hugging them, riding them, treating them humanely and respectfully. There is just something very grounding and soul nurturing about interacting with animals, whether that be in nature or in your home. I put off getting a dog for a long time. I just thought, man, it's too much responsibility. I'm going to be too pissed if they pee on the carpet or whatever. I won't be able to live my life free, man. Like, I don't want to have to be responsible for something, that whole thing. I grew out of that and eventually got my dog a couple of years ago. And I'm obsessed. I can't wait to come home and meet my dog. And, she's right here in the studio, sitting in her little teepee. And just knowing she's there kind of connects me to nature, even though I'm technically indoors. So be with animals, observe animals. And if you're so inclined and you live somewhere where this is a possibility and it fits your lifestyle, might even consider interacting with your animals in your environment by hunting or fishing. I know this is sort of politically incorrect in some circles. I would encourage those of you that feel that that is a practice that is not conscious and evolved to follow the work again of my friend Daniel Vitalis. He's got a new podcast called Wild Fed, which we're going to be talking about when he's on the show next week. And you'd be surprised to know that hunters are, in fact, probably generally speaking, the most staunch protectors of the environment out of anyone. They are probably the utmost environmentalists because their livelihood, their sport, the food that they put on the table depends on the environment being sustained in a healthy way. So it's something you might consider. It's not something I've personally done much of in my life, or at least in my adult life, but I think that there is a place for certain people to build a relationship with nature through hunting, foraging, fishing, etc. We'll be right back at you after this brief but important announcement. All right, I've got a new discovery to share with you. It's called Peak Tea Crystals. Now, I've been a fan of tea and I've understood the health benefits of tea for a long time. But to be quite honest, I always feel like tea is a little weak. Like the flavor profile is just not there for me. And as a result, I feel like there's probably not enough medicine in it. Additionally, I find it to be a little bit of a pain in the ass to make tea because you got to deal with the whole tea bag. You have to wait for it to be ready and all that. I don't know. It's just kind of like hard for me to figure out. What I love about Peak Tea is that they make a concentrated tea extract powder that you easily just pour into some hot water. And it makes this tea 12 times more antioxidant rich, and I would say at least 12 times more potent in its flavor. It's absolutely delicious. And so during the day, I'll often have one of these myself, like a green tea, maybe jasmine, mint green, or the fermented pu'er green tea. And I'll often offer these to my guests when they come in. And every single time they're like, oh my God, this is the best tea ever. What is it? And that's my secret. I don't tell them. No, I do. It's Peak Tea Crystals. Also at night, they have a hibiscus and a ginger that are really great, kind of warming, soothing teas, and they're super strong and just delicious tasting. Sometimes I'll even use these teas as a base to work on other elixirs and like add some ghee and different things like that. And so they're just freaking amazing, and I'm excited to share them with you. They are triple tested for toxins. They're like absolutely the cleanest, most delicious, and most health beneficial teas I've ever found. Very concentrated polyphenols. really good for your immunity and a balanced microbiome. They're just absolutely awesome. So here's what I'd like you to do. Go over to peaktea.com. That's PIQUETAE, peaktea.com. Enter the code LukeStory and save 10% off. That's peaktea.com. The code is LukeStory for 10% off. They don't have sales very often. There's a hard company to get discount with. So get over there and get your discount now. However, I must say this discount does not apply to their fermented pu'er teas due to their limited quantity. But go to peaktea.com, enter the code LukeStory, and save 10% off right now. And now, back to the interview. Speaking of foraging, this is something I'm becoming increasingly interested in, and I've not delved into, but I really want to. When I'm out in nature, I do sometimes come across plants, herbs, etc., that I know to be edible, and I'll just munch on them. But I know there are thousands of them probably all the time around me, and I just don't know what they are. So I'm looking forward to learning a bit more about that. As I said, Daniel's become an expert in this. There are so many people now that do guided tours where you can go out into your local landscape and find things that you can eat in nature. I know in LA, like in Griffith Park, there's a certain time of year where wild fennel grows all over the place. And one day I was walking by and I just grabbed a twig and I smelled it, and it sort of had that licorice smell. And I thought, what the hell is this licorice? Oh no, this is fennel. So now when I go out, I just crush that stuff. It's delicious. And I mean, I don't like harvest it and bring it home, but just on a hike, I'll grab a stalk of it and just kind of chew on it. And it's a great way to anchor myself into my local LA environment. Mine are probably dusted with chemtrails and God knows what, but you only live once, right? And next would be just general exposure to the elements, extreme hot and cold temperatures. I love/hate going outside. I might travel. Maybe I go to New Mexico or Colorado or somewhere in the winter, and I will sort of force myself into doing a cryotherapy session by just going outside with little to no clothing on and just running around in the snow, just getting super, super cold. Another way to do that, of course, is with, like a clinical cryotherapy application using the technology that allows you to do that, jumping in ice baths, cold bodies of water. And then as far as extreme heat, I love going out and just sweating, being in the desert, just being not dehydrated, but just allowing those desert or even hot tropical climates to just kind of wring you out periodically throughout the year. And of course, you can mimic hot exposure that we would have evolved to experience in nature through the use of infrared saunas or going to like a Russian banya or even the barrel saunas that some people have in their backyard, etc. So I kind of hack this a lot of the time living in a city, just doing the saunas and the ice bath and the hot tub and things like that. But the reason that I'm such a proponent of this is that I think part of our domestication and what has made us so fragile in terms of not only our immune system and our general resilience, but also our nervous system and our emotional fragility, which in Western culture, so many, especially young people, now suffer from. I think that we will become less sensitive to our environment and to what we perceive to be negative stimuli, like somebody's tweets, if we can handle sitting in a 220-degree sauna for 30 minutes or sitting in a 35-degree ice bath for 10 minutes. If you can build up your nervous system to be able to handle extremes like that, there are so many benefits, not only physically, but psychologically. And that's what we've evolved to do. Unless you were, of a human species, or what do you call it, like a nationality, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but if you evolved to be from the equator or near the equator, then it's likely you would have had kind of a similar temperature throughout the year. Maybe you'd have a rainy season and then you'd have like a sunny season, but the temperatures wouldn't vary that much. But that's a kind of a very narrow band around the planet, right? Most of us have migrated and evolved, and especially Northern European people, etc. And we've kind of evolved to have high degrees of different temperatures that we experience all the time throughout the seasons. And so being someone myself, as you know, that lives in LA, I don't really have seasons here, unfortunately. I create my own seasons using technology, and exposing yourself to hot and cold is a great way to rewild. And in general, if you think of the human as a type of ape, which technically we are, if you look at what happens to all animals, and especially apes, when you take them out of their natural environment, you put them in a zoo, for example, their health begins to decline because they're not eating their natural diet. They aren't moving in natural ways. They're unable to traverse the landscape as they would living in the forest or the jungle, etc. So what we've done as a species, as humans, is we've put ourselves in prisons and zoos known as office buildings, airports, houses, supermarkets, etc., where we're not only living indoors and completely disconnected from our natural light and air and the microbiome of the soil and the plants and animals and everything that we would have evolved to interact with, but we're also not moving like the human ape animal is meant to move. And this is probably the area of rewilding that I'm most deficient in, admittedly. And so, I do the exercise that is fast, easy, and has the biggest bang for your buck, like my X3 Pro Bar and jumping on my trampoline and doing my Carol bike for some high-intensity interval training in the garage, and do a bit of hiking. I swim when I can, do a little bit of very novice Tai Chi, lots of Kundalini yoga, sometimes some Hatha yoga. But the people that are really into primal movement, like my brother Cody's story, there's a number of, like, MoveNat would be a great place to start. Now, I've never fully committed to a natural movement practice, but I am a huge believer in the fundamental principles that drive those movements. It's just not something that I've been terribly attracted to or really built a discipline around. And, I'm not being critical or hard on myself for admitting that. It's just kind of the way it is. It's not an area that I've really delved into a lot. But it is something that I would like to do more. And what I kind of do is when I get outdoors, I just kind of pretend like I'm an ape, and I'll climb some trees, I'll hang around, I'll do some squats. I mean, I do my best to kind of move like an ape. Now, there are people that take this to an extreme and will climb up hills on all fours and like really go next level. And I think that's great. But that's just something I wanted to throw in here, because I think when it comes to our domestication and what we've done to ourselves, that limiting our ranges of motion in our various joints and throughout our body and living such a sedentary lifestyle is one of the main contributors to our demise. Not only our diet, lack of fresh air, fresh water, but just the way we move is just completely antithetical to health and well-being. So in terms of rewilding, let me see, Tiffany. Yes, it was Tiffany who asked that question. Thank you so much for asking that, because I think oftentimes myself and others included get caught up in the novelty and convenience of taking a magic smart drug, pill, supplement, biohacking device to fix whatever's wrong with us. And while those things, of course, have a place, and I'm a huge fan of so many of those modalities and interventions, to me, like, our whole problem really stems from our lack of interaction with our natural environment. And that also includes, by the way, interaction with other people and physical touch and love and sensuality and connection and intimacy, and those things that we've also evolved to experience on a regular basis. And I notice this a lot within my own life, just being single at the moment and living by myself. I mean, thank God I have my dog here, so I have another creature in the house to kind of interact with and relate to. But because most of my friends are in relationships, like the homies, they're not around, they're all nested up, and people come over to record the podcast. But I live in a little bit of a remote area of the city, and I spend a lot of time by myself, and I feel the effects of that. So one of the commitments I have to myself is, in fact, just getting out and socializing more, not like going to bars and parties, but just kind of putting myself around small groups of people where I can interact and share thoughts and ideas and get loved on and love on other people, and just get that element of human connection back. Because I think many of us that are in relationships get many of our needs served that way, or people that have, family members in close proximity. We get our needs for intimacy and communication connection met in those ways. But some of us, especially those of us that live away from our families or never had a terribly connected family to begin with and live in cities, we're kind of missing that. And so I would just add that as kind of an addendum to the rewilding. Keep in mind that we've also evolved to run in hunter-gatherer packs of 50 to 60 people, and we're around all those people pretty much all day, unless we're out on a hunt for a few hours. But there's going to be a communal time at night where we sit by the fire, we dance, we might even have some form of a drink, alcohol. There could be plant medicines involved. I mean, ceremonies, all this kind of stuff. I mean, there's like people have gotten together in community since there have been people. And I think oftentimes in our modern lifestyle, we get so caught up in the hustle and the grind that we kind of forget how important that is. So I'll just throw that in there. Next one, Peter asks how to optimize gut health. And this one this will be the last question. I tend to do about 3 per episode, and it puts us at about an hour. So I think that's my average, is 3 questions in an hour. I am not an expert on gut health. And it's funny because I think out of all of my, in terms of physical issues that I have, really hacking the gut health and digestion has been one that I've had a very difficult time doing. I've solved so many problems that I've had over the years in terms of just weird stuff going on in the body through all the different things that I've learned and applied. But gut health to me, Peter, still remains a bit of a mystery. It's funny, as I'm talking about the gut, I'm feeling a big burp come up. I'm like, see, there it is right there. What did I eat? I think a lot of my gut problems honestly have to do with the fact that I just don't eat enough normal, solid food like meat and potatoes I wouldn't eat potatoes probably because most of them are really high in pesticides or NPK fertilizers. But you know what I mean? Just eating like meat and veggies. When I eat that, a little seafood, I tend to feel good. But oftentimes I'm just in a hurry and I suck at cooking. I don't care about it. I don't want to be good at it. I don't want to do it. Just not something I'm personally interested in. And so I think oftentimes I just live on smoothies and quick elixirs and things like that. And it's probably doing my gut a disservice. But anyway, enough about my personal problems. Here are my recommendations based on the experts that I've interviewed and the things that have helped my gut get along. First thing I would recommend is doing testing. Just guessing and hearing like, oh, I need to take a bunch of probiotics or prebiotics or whatever it is, I don't think is a wise strategy. For example, let's just say you hear prebiotic fiber is good for you, right? Like, resistant starch or whatever the case may be. So you're like, oh, I need to feed the bacteria. So I'm going to eat a bunch of prebiotics. Well, what if you have a bunch of bad guys, meaning like you have a bunch of bad bacteria, pathogenic, opportunistic bacteria in your gut? Well, guess what? You're just feeding them and helping them to proliferate. So the most important first step to me in gut health is testing. Now, there's a number of different tests you can do. A great one to start with is the Viome test. You can find that at lukestory.com/store. That's Viome, Viome. That's a relatively easy test to do. It's inexpensive. I won't go into the details of how it's done in case you're eating lunch or something, but it is actually the least gross of all sort of stool collection and testing that you can do. And that's going to indicate to you what foods your gut needs and what foods it doesn't need. And it's interesting because when I did my most recent Viome test, I got back my results and I was like, oh my God, please don't tell me that I can't eat grass-fed beef or sardines or I don't know, whatever kind of shit that I eat. And, there are a few vegetables I like and a few that I don't really like. And my test came back with exactly what my body naturally gravitates toward and gravitates away from. So the Viome test is a good starting point. However, I don't think that that's going to give you a complete picture, especially if you're someone with a very compromised microbiome. So the next step would be hooking up with a functional medicine doctor who really is specialized in understanding how to not only read your gut biome labs and the results of that testing, but also to make very sound recommendations on how you might upgrade and fix whatever problems that you're having, right? So you might find that you have food sensitivities. You could have an overgrowth in fungus, bad bacteria. There's all kinds of different things that can be going on in your gut. And it's very complex. And as I said, something that I don't at all claim to be an expert in. But I think just kind of guessing and just falling for, marketing from different companies trying to sell you different supplements and stuff, it's probably going to be a waste of time and money until you really get a snapshot of what's going on there. Now, I recently did the Viome test, as I said, and then I did some testing with Dr. Scott Scher. And when you do your home gut biome testing, I'm just going to warn you, the collection process, because that's not really something someone can do for you. How do you time that? You go into, if you go in to give blood, you can give blood anytime. You can't necessarily give poops anytime. So it's not for the faint at heart. It's pretty gnarly. But anyway, you mail your DUI in, and lab analyzes it, and then your doctor tells you what's up. When I had mine done, there was one particular, I forget the name of it, Klebsiella it might have been called, a really bad, opportunistic bacteria that I had quite a lot of. There were also things that I was deficient in, butyrate, I think butyric acid, I believe it's called, which you're supposed to have more of. Anyway, my gut wasn't horrible, but it's kind of jacked up. And there's just no way I would have ever guessed what supplements I needed to take or how much of this or that. And so Dr. Scott got me dialed in and told me maybe 5 supplements that I need to take and some different things I should be eating. And I'm seeing a huge improvement already in just a few weeks. I just never would have been able to guess that. So get a good functional medicine doctor. Do the Viome test, get the testing done first would be my recommendation. Then start working with the probiotics, the enzymes, the dietary changes, etc. Something that I know to be very effective and something that I would recommend doing under the guidance of an expert would be rectal ozone. That's where you take an ozone generator and you have a very specific concentration and a very timed insertion of a catheter in the old, and you put ozone gas up there, and ozone gas kills just about everything in its tracks that's not good for you. So this is especially useful for fungal infections, candida overgrowth, etc. It can also contribute in healing leaky gut, because as you get all of the bad critters out of your insides, your body has the ability to heal that mucous membrane and all of those things inside. You got to think of your digestive system as basically like a hose that goes from your mouth to your anus. And you think of it as the inside of your body, but that long tube is really outside of your body. It's a tube that runs through your body, but it's not open to your body. However, if you have leaky gut, outsides are getting into your insides, to put it very simply. And so doing the rectal ozone and different other interventions that can be recommended by a highly qualified functional medicine doctor can help you to heal all of that. And so I recommend, researching ozone. I've been doing it myself because I did enough research. I kind of figured it out and it's going well, but it's not something I would go into willy-nilly. There's a great book by Dr. Frank Schallenberger you can find on ozone. I think it's called The Ozone Miracle, and I've got it. I haven't quite read the whole thing. It's a super easy, quick read. I just haven't gotten around to it. I kind of start doing the therapies and then I study on it sometimes before I feel like I can recommend it. But there are clinics and places like that where you can go get ozone therapy, and that can be a quick way to get rid of some of the bad guys in your gut. Avoiding all foods that cause leaky gut, like non-organic wheat products, typically will have glyphosate or Roundup, which is just wrecks your gut in the worst way. And I would say most people probably have some degree of leaky gut from glyphosate, just being in our food supply, being in our water supply. Also, be mindful that most beer and wine is loaded with glyphosate, especially wine. So if you drink wine, from what I understand, I would look into dry farms wines and also wines in Europe where glyphosate is more restricted in its use, agriculturally speaking, especially in the raising of wine grapes. So avoiding products in your diet that wreck your gut, and even, the inflammatory kind of destructive nature of gluten. For some people, it seems some are more sensitive than others, but based on my research, gluten is probably something that we'd be best advised to avoid, generally speaking, if you want to have healthy digestion. Same thing goes for food preservatives. I think that that's kind of a sneaky misnomer. Food preservatives they don't actually preserve. What they do is they kill. They should be called food pathogen killers, because what preservatives in food do is prevent the growth of bacteria, et cetera, that's going to make the food spoil. So if you're eating food full of preservatives, you're killing the bacteria in your gut, even the bacteria that you need to have healthy digestion and to absorb minerals and nutrients from your food. And that's really one of the main problems that we have with digestive and gut problems, is that we're perhaps eating a really high quality diet. We're taking great supplements. We're like putting everything in the body that it needs and wants. But the problem is that we're not assimilating that because our digestive system is not working properly. So that's why you want to avoid all of those nasties. Another thing that's really helped my gut is eating and drinking. Well, I guess you drink it, bone broth. And this is something that's become quite popular. This is not a new trend. Human beings have been boiling bones for as long as we've been tracking human behavior. And there's a lot of nutrients and collagen and gelatin and things in bone broth that are very healing to the gut. And also, it's also just very nutritionally dense because of the amino acids and the different things in there. And the proteins are very bioavailable. Bone broth is just really, really good for you. You want to make sure that you source bone broth that isn't from animals that have a lot of lead in their bones, or bone broth that has, that's made with crappy tap water, et cetera. Kettle and Fire is a great brand. I think I have that, pretty sure, at lukestory.com/store. And that one's shelf stable. A lot of the bone broths are kind of difficult because they go bad. And if you don't use them in time, you get hosed. So I like the Kettle and Fire for convenience purposes. You can also make your own. I think if you make your own bone broth, you can do that in a crock pot. I used to do it. You'll probably last about a month doing that. And then you're going to want to just go buy it. You end up spending that much money at the farmer's market on the grass-fed animal bones, and it's the fat gets everywhere, all over your kitchen. I don't know. I wasn't a fan. But then again, as you know, as I said earlier, I'm not a culinary master by any stretch, and I have no desire to become one. So maybe that's why I don't like making my own bone broth. But you can do it, just so you know. And then also when it comes to digestion and gut health, I'm a huge fan of enzymes. There's a lot of great and different types of enzymes you can take that help you break down carbohydrates, fats, and protein. There's a company called Bioptimizers that I carry in my store that are my favorite so far. They also make a great HCl, hydrochloric acid product. Many people are low in acid production, and that happens to be one of the main causes of acid reflux, as weird as that might be. Most heartburn is caused from low stomach acid, not too much stomach acid. And I just interviewed the guys from Bioptimizers. That'll be out soon, early into 2020. And they explain all of this, obviously, in much greater detail than I'm able to here. But I do have a general understanding that enzymes really help you break down food, especially if you have a compromised gut, as many of us do from growing up on Hot Pockets and Twinkies, etc. Another practice that can be great for gut health is periodic colon cleansing by getting colonics. There's different types and different ways of doing it. Personally, it's something I'll do maybe a couple times a year. Some people recommend more, some less. Some people don't recommend it at all. I think the anti-colonic people would indicate that you're washing away all of the beneficial bacteria, which I'll give you a solution for. But you want to be mindful of the clinic that you're going to, making sure that they're using absolutely sterile water that has been filtered in terms of all the chemicals that are present in municipal sources of water, aka tap water. In other words, you have a mucous membrane inside your colon that absorbs everything, just like the mucous membrane inside your mouth or vagina, for that matter. So if you want to get things into your body, you put them in your mouth, vagina, or colon, because it absorbs right into your bloodstream and doesn't have to go through the digestive process. And that's great for putting certain things in, but you want to be mindful not to be putting poisons in by going to some shady colonic clinic. Speaking of clinics, there's something that they'll do sometimes at some colonic clinics, and they'll do what's called an implant after the colonic. And they'll either implant positive probiotics to sort of repopulate the lower tract there, what is it? The small intestine? I forget which one. Anyway, inside the colon, they put a bunch of good bacteria back in there. And then there's another therapy too, kind of as a different application, and that's doing an implant of enzymes, systemic enzymes that can go into your bloodstream and help with things like scar tissue, etc. So there's a couple different types of implants you can do. I would definitely recommend putting some good bacteria in there after you've gotten thoroughly cleaned out. Many of us unknowingly have years and years of old debris stuck in our colon, and very difficult to get out without putting some water in there and jarring it loose. And there's a number of different ways that you can do that. As I said, many different modalities. I personally prefer gravity-fed colonics. They're much more gentle, a lot more comfortable than some of the other methods, which are kind of like putting a fire hose up your butt, can be quite crampy, to say the least. Another way that you can clean the colon is by doing different protocols involving eating clay, charcoal, and different binders that absorb and then remove toxins from your GI tract. I think this is a really important thing to do if you're going to start getting into fasting and detoxing, and especially cleansing your internal organs. So if you're doing like a gallbladder or liver cleanse or something like that, which can be great, it's really important that your colon is clean and working properly in its ability to eliminate those toxins once they all dump out of your organs. So it's something I definitely wanted to mention. And I'll be doing some more gut health podcasts. As I said, I've got one coming up with the guys from Biooptimizers where we really kind of dissect digestion specifically. And then also, at one point, I'm going to find like the gut expert. There's a few around that are great, like Dr. Zach Bush seems to have some good things to say, a great body of knowledge. There's a couple other people I have on my radar. So this is such a fundamental part of our health, really getting your gut optimized, that it's something I'm going to focus on a bit in 2020, because I just think that it's so important. And as I said, it's something I'm personally vested in sorting out because of the issues that I've had and continue to have to some degree. So you can look forward to more information on the gut coming soon. And I think that just about wraps up our 3 questions. As I said, it's always best to talk to a health professional or a doctor or someone who has some credentials of some kind before undergoing any wacky, health practices. So take all of this with a grain of salt. As I said, this is just stuff that I've learned from my many intelligent guests, many of whom have been brilliant doctors and such. But this is something you want to go research on your own. I'd also encourage you to join the Lifestylist Podcast Facebook group, where you can post questions just like this and have a high degree of likelihood that they will be answered on a future Q&A show, just like the one I did. All right, let's thank our sponsors, Just Thrive. That's Just Thrive Probiotic. And this is a perfect sponsor for this particular episode because this probiotic is spore-based, which means it survives the gut tract and then starts making a home inside of you, and that's what you want. Most probiotics are transitory by nature. This particular probiotic digs in and makes a home and improves your gut health dramatically. So that's justtthriveprobiotic.com/Luke. You can use the code Luke15 to save 15% off at thriveprobiotic.com/Luke. Then our old friends at Organifi, that's Organifi.com/Luke. The code there's Lifestylist and you save 20%. And then next you can go to Peak Tea. That's Peak Tea is spelled PIQUET.com. Enter the code Luke Story for 10% off. And they rarely do sales there. They're not someone that gives out codes willy-nilly. So you definitely want to check that out. That's peaktea.com. Use the code Luke Story. However, I must give the disclaimer that discount does not apply to their fermented pu'er teas, the fancy ones, due to limited quality. So thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. I look forward to jumping back into your ears this Tuesday with Wild Fed, How to Become a Modern-Day Hunter-Gatherer with Daniel Vitalis. Make sure you subscribe to the show so you don't miss any future episodes. And do yourself, the world, and me a favor and share this show with a friend right now. This episode of the Lifestylist Podcast was produced by podcastmasters.net.